I thought loyalty was something you could buy. He thought love was something you could command. He thought the woman carrying his child would swallow her pain and smile through it, because that was what Valenti women did. Adrian Valenti had spent 20 years building an empire on fear, and not once had anyone made him bleed from the inside. Not until the night his mother walked into that room, looked him in the eye, and chose someone else. If you're watching this, drop a like and tell me what city you're in right now. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because this one doesn't end the way you think. The rain came down hard that Tuesday night, the kind that made New York feel like it was trying to drown itself. Water sheeted off the awnings on Mulberry Street, pooled in the gutters, turned the asphalt black and shining under the street lights. Inside the restaurant, Valentino's, 3 floors, private dining on the top level, the kind of place that didn't take reservations from people it didn't already know, the noise was controlled and low. Crystal on the tables, candles that cost more than most people's grocery bills. And in the corner booth behind the frosted glass partition, Adrian Valenti sat with his hand on the back of a woman who was not his wife. Her name was Simone Arquette, 29 years old, the kind of beautiful that made men stupid and women careful. She laughed at something Adrian said and touched his jaw with 2 fingers, and Adrian let her, and the whole thing looked practiced, comfortable in the way that only comes from doing something long enough that you stop worrying about getting caught. He should have worried. Marcus Reyes was the one who saw them. Marcus, who had worked for the Valenti family for 11 years, who owed his brother's release from Rikers to a phone call Adrian made in 2019, who drove Elena Moretti to her prenatal appointments when Adrian was too busy. Marcus sat at the bar with a glass of water and a knot in his chest and watched for 4 minutes before he pulled out his phone. He didn't call Adrian. He didn't call any of the other soldiers. He stared at the screen for a long time, thinking about what it meant to be loyal to a man versus what it meant to be loyal to a family. Then he put the phone back in his pocket and sat there until the feeling settled into something flat and cold. He didn't tell Elena that night. He told her the next morning at the kitchen table of the Valenti townhouse on West 68th Street while she was eating toast and reading something on her tablet, 7 months pregnant and still running the household's charity accounts from her laptop. He sat down across from her. He didn't dress it up. "There's something you need to know," he said. Elena set down the toast. She looked at his face, and she already knew. Not the specifics, but the shape of it. Women married to men like Adrian developed a kind of radar. You learned to read the silences between phone calls, the way he showered immediately after coming home, the particular quality of attention he paid you when he was compensating for something. She had been reading those signs for 3 months and telling herself she was wrong. She wasn't wrong, Marcus told her. Kept his eyes on the table mostly. Said the woman's name. Said how long he thought it had been going on. Said he was sorry. Elena sat very still. Her hands were flat on the table. Outside the kitchen window, the city was doing its normal Tuesday thing. Traffic, pigeons, a FedEx truck double parked. Normal. Everything indecently normal. "Thank you," she said. Her voice didn't shake. Marcus nodded. He stood up. He didn't know what else to say, so he left. Elena sat at that table for 45 minutes. She didn't cry. She pressed one hand against her stomach and felt the baby move, a slow roll, an elbow or a knee pushing out against the wall of her, and she breathed through her nose and stared at the half-eaten toast and tried to understand what her life was now. She had known what she was marrying. That was something she would not pretend otherwise, even inside her own head. You didn't meet Adrian Valenti at a fundraiser in 2019 and believe he was just a real estate developer with interesting friends. You saw the way rooms shifted when he walked in. You noticed which conversations stopped and which ones started. You felt the particular gravitational pull of a man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered to him. She had fallen in love with him anyway, or something adjacent to love, something that at 26 felt indistinguishable from it. By the time she understood the full weight of what she'd stepped into, she was already in it, already wearing his ring, already learning which questions not to ask. She had made peace with the empire. She had never made peace with being expendable. Adrian came home at 7 that evening. She heard the front door, heard him in the foyer, heard the particular sound his shoes made on the marble when he was in a good mood, unhurried, confident, a man who owned the floor he walked on. He came into the kitchen and kissed her on the side of the head and opened the refrigerator and said something about being hungry. And Elena stood at the counter with her back to him and her hands wrapped around a glass of water and said, "Tell me about Simone Arquette." The refrigerator closed. The kitchen got very quiet. "Where did you hear that name?" Adrian said. Not a question, a calculation. Elena turned around. She looked at him straight. "It doesn't matter where I heard it. Tell me how long." He was a man who had sat across from federal prosecutors and not blinked. He had negotiated in rooms where the wrong answer meant a body in the river. He was not someone who showed his hand, but Elena watched something move across his face. Fast, almost invisible, and she cataloged it. Not guilt exactly. More like the specific irritation of a man who has been caught not because he did something wrong in his own accounting, but because the machinery failed. "Sit down," he said. "I don't want to sit down." "Elena?" "How long, Adrian?" He set his keys on the counter, took a breath. 4 months. She had told herself she was prepared. She wasn't prepared. The number, 4 months, the entire second trimester, the appointments and the scans and the nights she'd lain awake with her hand on her stomach, thinking about what kind of family they were building, landed in her chest like something physical. She didn't throw the glass. She thought about it. Instead, she set it down on the counter very carefully, the way you put something down when your hands are shaking and you don't want anyone to know. "I want you out of this bedroom tonight," she said. I'm not negotiating with you." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm telling you, get your things and sleep somewhere else. We'll talk when I'm ready to talk." Adrian looked at her for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes. The recognition, maybe, that this was different from the arguments they'd had before. That she was not performing. That the ground had actually shifted. "You're being emotional," he said. "You need to think about what you're asking me to." "I know exactly what I'm asking." She picked the glass back up. "Get out of my room." He left. Not because he was chastened, Adrian Valenti did not do chastened, but because he understood that pushing her right now would make the problem bigger, and he was already calculating how to make it manageable. He went down the hall to the guest suite and closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed and thought. By his own analysis, this was containable. Elena was upset. Elena was pregnant and hormonal, and the information had come at a bad time. He would give her 2 days to feel what she needed to feel, and then he would come to her with a version of the truth that emphasized remorse, emphasized the stress of running the organization, emphasized that what he and Simone had was nothing, a weakness, a mistake, already finished. He would not beg. He would present. He would remind her gently of the life she had and what walking away from it would mean. He would be patient and strategic, and eventually Elena would understand, as she always had understood, that the architecture of their life together was larger than any single wound. It did not occur to him, not once, to call his mother. He should have called his mother. Lucia Valenti arrived the next morning at 9:15. She had not been summoned. She came because Marcus had called her the previous night, not to report on her son, but because Lucia had told him years ago, when he first came into the family's orbit, that if anything ever happened to Elena, he was to tell her directly. Marcus understood what anything meant. He made the call. Lucia was 63 years old and had been a widow for 17 of them. She was not a large woman. She was not the kind of woman who walked into rooms and took them over with volume or spectacle. She did it with stillness, a quality of focused attention that made other people feel simultaneously seen and measured. She had raised Adrian alone after his father died. She had sat at tables that most men in this city weren't allowed within 100 feet of. She had buried friends and handled enemies and done the kinds of things that never got discussed in polite company, all for the sake of the family her husband built and her son was meant to carry forward. She loved Adrian. She had always loved Adrian. And she had spent 20 years watching him become a man who confused power with permission. She let herself in with her key. She found Elena in the living room, sitting on the couch in yesterday's clothes, her hair loose, her face carrying the particular wreckage of a night spent mostly not sleeping. A cup of tea sat on the coffee table, gone cold. Lucia sat down next to her. Not across from her. Next to her. She didn't say anything for a minute, just sat. Let the room breathe. Then Elena said, "He told you." "Marcus told me." "Of course." Elena almost laughed. Didn't quite get there. I don't know what I thought. that I'd figure out what to do before you had to know. You don't have to figure anything out alone, Lucia said. That's what I'm here for. Elena finally looked at her. Her eyes were dry. She'd burned through the crying sometime before dawn, and what was left was something rawer and harder. He thinks I'm going to calm down, she said. He thinks this is something I process, and then we move past. He came to the door this morning. He actually came to the door, with coffee. Lucia absorbed this without expression. He said he understood I needed space. He said he wanted me to know he was committed to working through this. Elena's voice took on a brittle edge. Like it's a budget problem. Like we have a systems issue that needs resolution. What did you say? I didn't open the door. Lucia nodded slowly. Good. Something in Elena's face shifted at that. At the single word, the absence of any qualifier, any but or however, or you have to think about. Just good. He's going to come to you, Elena said. He always does. He's going to tell you I'm being unreasonable, and that I need to understand the pressures he's under, and that the family reputation, I know what he's going to say. Lucia reached over and covered Elena's hand with her own. I've been hearing versions of it for 40 years. First from his father, now from him. She paused. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I will tell you that you are not staying in this house alone with this while he manages his way out of it. Pack what you need for a few weeks. You're coming home with me. Elena stared at her. He'll fight it, she said. I know. He'll say you're interfering. He'll say you're undermining his... Elena. Lucia's hand tightened over hers. Let me worry about my son. Adrian found out 2 hours later. He called Lucia's house to reach Elena, since Elena wasn't answering his calls, and Lucia picked up and told him plainly, Elena is here, she's resting, she'll talk to you when she's ready. The silence on the other end lasted about 4 seconds. She's my wife, Adrian said. She's a woman who was betrayed by someone who should have protected her, Lucia said, and she's carrying your child. She needs rest, and she needs to not be managed, so that is what she will get. This is not your business, Ma. Then it shouldn't concern you. She hung up. Adrian called back twice. She didn't answer. The Valenti estate in Westchester had been Lucia's since Carlo died. 12 rooms, grounds that went down to a small lake, a garden that Lucia tended herself in the warmer months. It was the house where Adrian had grown up, where he'd learned to be what he was, and it had never occurred to him that it might one day be used as a fortification against him. Elena arrived that afternoon with 2 bags and her prenatal vitamins and a blank expression that Lucia recognized as the face of a woman holding herself together by friction alone. Lucia put her in the bedroom that got the morning light. She made soup. She did not make Elena talk. She did not offer advice or perspective or the kind of wisdom that felt like a performance of wisdom. She just made sure Elena ate something, and that the room was warm, and that there was someone in the house who was on her side without condition. In the evening, they sat on the back porch and watched the light go off the lake, and Lucia told her about the first year after Carlo died. Not the grief, but the specific experience of discovering who she was without the man who had defined the edges of her existence. It was not a pretty story. It had a lot of wrong turns in it, but it ended with her still standing, still running the household, still present for a 12-year-old boy who needed her to not fall apart. You built something, Elena said. I kept something, Lucia said. There's a difference. Building comes later, when you have your legs under you again. She looked out at the water. You'll build something different from what you thought it would be, but yours. Elena was quiet for a moment. I don't know who I am outside of this family. You were someone before you came into it. That feels like a long time ago. It always does. Lucia stood, moved to the railing, rested her hands on it. The woman you were before Adrian, she's not gone. She got quieter. She learned to take up less space because that was safer, but she's still in there. She looked back at Elena. I watched her the whole time. I was waiting to see if she'd come back. Elena's jaw tightened. She was fighting something, the urge to cry, or the urge to deny that it mattered, or both simultaneously. He's not going to let this go quietly, she said. You know that. He's going to try every angle. He will, Lucia agreed. He is my son, and I know exactly what he's capable of and how he thinks. And I know how I think too. She turned back to the lake. He's never tested that particular knowledge. That was his mistake. Adrian's first move was through Sal Benedetti, his consigliere and Lucia's oldest friend. He sent Sal to the estate 2 days after Elena arrived, ostensibly for a social call, actually to take the temperature and, if possible, apply gentle pressure in the right direction. Sal had known Lucia for 40 years. He was the closest thing to neutral ground the family had. He arrived at noon. Lucia gave him coffee. She let him talk for 20 minutes about the weather and the state of things, and how concerned he was about the situation, and how he hoped everyone could come to an understanding that served the family's best interests. Then she said, "Sal, I know why you're here." He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Lucia, he sent you to see if I could be reasoned with. He's worried about Elena, about the baby. He wants to know she's all right." "She's all right. She'd be better if she didn't have to wonder whether her husband is still seeing the woman he spent 4 months of her pregnancy with." Sal was quiet. "You want to know if I'm going to come to my senses," Lucia said. "If I'm going to recognize that this is a private family matter that I've made public. If I'm going to accept that what Adrian did was a mistake that deserves forgiveness, and that my job is to help smooth the path back to the way things were." Sal looked at his coffee. "The way things were," Lucia said, "was my daughter-in-law performing contentment in a marriage where she was being deceived. I was watching that and telling myself it wasn't my place. I was wrong." She refilled his cup without being asked. "Tell Adrian that Elena is safe and being cared for. Tell him she'll speak to him when she's ready. Tell him not to send anyone else to my house without an invitation." Sal left an hour later. He was a man who had delivered difficult news many times. He was not looking forward to this particular delivery. The news spread the way it always spread in a world built on information and leverage, fast, distorted, and loaded with implication. By the end of that first week, the story circulating through the organization was that Adrian Valenti's wife had left him, that his mother had taken her side, and that Lucia Valenti had personally told Sal Benedetti to communicate that the estate was off limits. The details varied depending on who was telling them, but the core of it was consistent. There was a split in the Valenti family, and it had happened at the top. This mattered. In the world Adrian operated in, the family unit was not sentimental. It was structural. Your wife's loyalty was a signal to your allies about your judgment. Your mother's positioning was a signal about the health of your house. When people saw Lucia Valenti moving Elena Moretti into the family estate instead of pressuring her to return to her husband, they were not seeing a domestic dispute. They were seeing a matriarch issue a verdict. Adrian's phone started doing something it hadn't done in a while. Some calls came in slower. Some meetings that should have been easy to arrange required an extra step, an additional confirmation, a question or two that hadn't been there before. Nothing dramatic. Nothing you could point to. Just a slight change in atmospheric pressure, the way the air feels different before weather rolls in. Tommy Carraro, who ran the waterfront operations and had been aligned with the Valentis for 9 years, had lunch with his brother-in-law instead of attending a scheduled check-in. He called afterward with an apology about a scheduling conflict. Adrian accepted it smoothly and said nothing, but he felt it. The confrontation he had been managing toward finally came on a Saturday, 12 days after Elena left. Adrian drove out to Westchester himself. No driver, no escort, which was itself a statement, a man coming as a son rather than as the head of an organization. He called ahead this time. Lucia answered and said, "I'll be in the garden." She was deadheading the roses when he arrived, moving along the beds with her clippers and her garden gloves, not looking up when she heard him come around the corner of the house. He was wearing jeans and a dark jacket, no tie. He looked tired in a way that was unusual for him. Adrian had always carried his energy well. He was one of those men who seemed to generate his own weather. But something in him had shifted slightly, some circuit running lower than usual. "You look like you haven't been sleeping," she said. "I haven't." He stopped at the edge of the garden. "Is Elena here?" "She went for a walk by the lake. She'll be back in an hour." He nodded, shoved his hands in his pockets. "I want to talk to her." "She knows." Lucia clipped a dead bloom. "She'll decide." He stopped, started again. "What I did was wrong. I know it was wrong. I'm not coming out here to defend it." "Good, because I wouldn't listen to that." "I'm coming out here because she's my wife and she's pregnant and she needs to be—" "She is being taken care of," Lucia said evenly. She is rested and fed, and she has privacy, and she is not being pressured. She is doing exactly what she needs to be doing. She looked up. Which is what I couldn't say when she was in that house with you working through your 12-point plan for making this manageable. Adrian's jaw tightened. I wasn't. You came to her door with coffee, Adrian. You gave her space for 48 hours. And then you came to her door with coffee, because that's how long you calculated she needed before you could begin the repair process. She set the clippers down on the low wall beside her. I know how you operate. I built some of it. That is not a conversation between people. That is a campaign. He was silent. You are my son, she said. I love you. I have loved you since before you took a breath, and I will love you after I don't have any left to take. But love does not mean I will stand in front of what you've done and make it easier for you to avoid the full weight of it. I'm not trying to avoid it. You had a 4-month affair with another woman while Elena was carrying your child. You came home to dinners she made. You let her believe everything was functioning. You sat in this house at Thanksgiving. Her voice caught, almost imperceptibly, and then steadied. And you looked me in the eye across that table, and you held her hand when she talked about the nursery. She looked at him directly. I need you to understand that I was at that table. I saw all of it, and I didn't know, and I am angry about that too. But not at you for deceiving me, at myself for not looking harder. Something crossed his face, something that wasn't strategy. I made a mistake, he said. His voice was lower now. You made a choice, she said. 4 months is not a mistake. A mistake is a moment. 4 months is a construction. You built something and you maintained it and you kept it hidden, and that required daily decisions that were not accidents. The word hung between them. He didn't have an answer for that. She watched him stand there in his expensive jeans in the afternoon light, and for a moment, just a moment, she saw the boy underneath. The 12-year-old who had cried in the kitchen after Carlo's funeral and then never cried again because he decided that day that crying was the thing you did before you understood how the world worked. She had watched him make that decision in real time, and she had let it happen because she was grieving herself and because she thought it was strength. Maybe that had been her mistake. What do you want me to do? He said. I want you to go home, she said. I want you to sit with what you've done without trying to fix it on your timeline. I want you to understand that Elena is not a problem to be resolved. And I want you to hear me when I tell you that whatever she decides, I will support her. He looked up. Even if she decides to leave. Especially then. It was the word especially that got him. She saw it land. He blinked once, slowly, like a man taking a hit he'd thought was coming but still felt. You would do that, he said. You would help her walk away from this family. I would help her walk toward herself, Lucia said. Those aren't the same thing, but I understand why you'd see them that way. He stood there for another moment. Then he turned and walked back along the side of the house toward the car. He didn't say goodbye. She didn't call after him. She picked the clippers back up and went back to the roses. Her hands were steady. Her chest was not. Elena came back from the lake an hour later with color in her face and mud on her boots, and she stood at the back door pulling them off when she asked, Did he come? He did. How was it? Lucia thought about the question. Hard, she said. For both of us. Elena left the boots by the door and came inside. She stood in the kitchen in her socks and looked out the window and said, I'm not going back to him. I know. I don't know if that's the right decision. I don't know what the right decision is. I know what I can live with and what I can't. She turned from the window. I can't live with going back because it's easier. I can't live with staying because leaving is too complicated. I need it to be an actual choice, not a capitulation. Then we make sure it is, Lucia said. Elena looked at her, really looked at her, the way people look at someone when they're deciding whether to trust something that feels too solid to be real. Why are you doing this? She said. He's your son. He is, Lucia said. And in 20 years, the baby you're carrying will be my grandchild. And I will be able to look that child in the eye and say that when it mattered, I did the right thing. She turned to the stove. That's worth something to me, even if it costs. Elena stood there in the kitchen of the house that had built the man who broke her. Outside, the afternoon light was going gold on the water. She put her hand on her stomach, felt the baby move. For the first time in 2 weeks, something in her chest loosened, just slightly, just enough. 3 days later, a car she didn't recognize pulled to the end of Lucia's driveway and sat there for 20 minutes without moving. Lucia saw it from the upstairs window. She called the one person she knew would handle it quietly and without escalation. Not Adrian. Not Sal. She called Danny Ricci, who had been with the family since before Adrian was born, and who understood, without it ever being stated explicitly, that there were things in this world worth protecting that had nothing to do with power or money or the ledger of what was owed. By the time Elena came downstairs for dinner, the car was gone. But Lucia knew what the car meant. It meant that the patience Adrian was performing had a limit. It meant that the part of him that ran on control rather than reason was starting to feel the pressure of an equation that wasn't resolving the way he'd modeled it. It meant that whatever came next would not be managed. It would be forced. She sat across from Elena at the dinner table and watched her eat and talk about something ordinary, something she'd read, something about a documentary she wanted to watch. And Lucia listened and responded and kept her face even. But in her chest, she was already preparing because she knew her son, and she knew that the real confrontation hadn't happened yet. The car came back the next morning. Same model, different plates. Lucia saw it from the kitchen window at 7:40 while the coffee was still brewing, a dark sedan sitting at the far end of the driveway with the engine running and the windows up. It stayed 12 minutes this time. Then it pulled away slow, no hurry, the way something moves when it wants to be seen leaving. She poured her coffee and didn't say anything to Elena. Elena was at the kitchen table with her tablet, reading, one hand curled around a glass of orange juice, her hair pulled back barefoot on the tile. She looked better than she had a week ago. Not good. Better. The difference between a woman drowning and a woman who had found something to hold on to. She was still pale around the eyes. She still woke up at 3 a.m. sometimes. Lucia could hear her moving through the hallway, going to the bathroom, not coming back to bed for 40 minutes. But she was eating. She was talking. She was present in a way she hadn't been when she first arrived, when she'd sat on that couch in yesterday's clothes and looked like someone had taken something out of her and not replaced it. Lucia drank her coffee standing at the window and thought about her son. She thought about the particular way Adrian processed being refused. She had watched it since he was 8 years old. He didn't rage immediately. That was his father's way, not his. Adrian went cold first. He assessed. He tried the rational approach, the reasonable offer, the framing that made resistance look like error. And when that didn't work, when the other person proved unmovable, something in him shifted registers. He stopped trying to persuade. He started applying pressure. Not dramatic pressure. Incremental. The kind you didn't feel until you were already deep inside it. The car at the end of the driveway was Adrian applying pressure. She refilled her cup and went to wake Danny Ricci. Danny was 58, built like a man who had spent his 30s doing things that left marks in his 40s, learning to be quieter about it. He slept in the small room off the garage that had been a staff apartment back when Carlo was alive. And when Lucia knocked at 7:50, he was already up, sitting on the edge of the bed pulling on his boots, because Danny Ricci had been reading rooms and sensing shifts in atmospheric pressure for 30 years, and he'd already seen the car go by twice. "You saw it," Lucia said. "Plates are from a rental agency in Queens, probably untraceable. Just presents." He tied the second boot. "He's not doing anything. Just reminding you he's out there." "I know what he's doing." She leaned against the doorframe. "I need you to make some calls. Not to anyone inside the organization. Outside. People who owe me personally, not the family." Danny looked up. "I'm not going to be sitting here with Elena waiting for him to decide how far he wants to push this," she said. "I want to know what he's moving, who he's talking to. I want to know before it gets here." He nodded once. "I'll make the calls this morning." "Quietly, Danny." "Always." Adrian was in his office on the 4th floor of the building on Chambers Street when his phone showed a message from an unlisted number. 3 words. She made calls. He read it twice, set the phone face down on the desk, and sat for a moment with his hands flat on the leather surface, looking at the wall. His office held the particular quality of silence that powerful men cultivated around themselves. Heavy furniture, no unnecessary sound, a view of the city that said surveyor rather than participant. He had built this room to think in. He was thinking now. His mother was not supposed to be a variable. She was the constant, the known quantity, the bedrock thing that didn't shift. His entire adult life, Lucia Valenti had been the one person who operated in pure alignment with the family's interests, which in practice meant alignment with his interests, because for 20 years those had been the same thing. She gave counsel, she hosted, she presided. She was the warm public face of a structure that was not always warm in its operations. She had never, not once, moved against him. He was only now understanding what it meant that she had. The problem was not Elena. Elena he understood. Elena was grief and hurt, and the entirely predictable response of a woman who had been betrayed by someone she trusted. He could work with that. He had a version of the future modeled out where Elena came back, where things were restructured, where he gave her things she wanted, more visibility, more autonomy, actual respect rather than the performance of it, and where the marriage survived in a form that worked for both of them. He had been willing to make real changes for that version, but the problem was what his mother's position communicated to the people watching. It communicated that someone inside the house had looked at his judgment and found it insufficient, and in his world, judgment was the one thing you couldn't afford to have questioned in public by someone credible. An enemy questioning your judgment was just war. Your mother questioning it was a different category of event entirely. He picked the phone back up, called Sal. "Tell me about the Ricci situation," he said, when Sal answered. Sal's pause was a half-second too long. "Danny's been with Lucia for 30 years. He's loyal to her personally. I know his history. I'm asking what he's doing right now. Making calls, nothing organized. People who know your mother go back with her. He's gathering information, probably. For her. Presumably." Adrian looked at the wall again. "Sal, I need you to be straight with me. I'm always straight with you. No, you're usually careful with me. I need you to be straight." He waited. "Is this recoverable? What she's doing, is it recoverable? Or has it already become something else?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Tommy Carraro rescheduled again," Sal said. "Vargas from the construction side has been vague about the Henderson project timeline. Nothing you can confront directly. Nothing that's moved past vague." He cleared his throat. "But Adrian, people are watching how you handle this, not the affair. The affair is private business. They're watching how you handle your mother's position, and every day it stays unresolved. It reads as a thing you can't resolve." "I can resolve it." "Then resolve it," Sal said, "before it resolves itself in a way you don't like." Adrian ended the call and sat with that for a while. Then he called a number he hadn't used in 2 months. Simone Arquette answered on the second ring, the way she always answered his calls, quickly, a little breathless, like she'd been waiting. He heard music in the background, something low. "I need you to end this cleanly," he said. "No conversation, no negotiation. I need the arrangement closed." The music faded. He heard her move somewhere quieter. "I see," she said. Her voice had changed, cooled. "Simone, you said that already, when your wife found out. You said it was complicated. You said to give you time." A pause. "How much time does ending it cleanly take?" "I'm asking you to be professional about this." "Professional?" The word came out with something sharp on the edge of it. "Adrian, I wasn't your employee." "I know what you were." He kept his voice level. "I'm not diminishing it. I'm telling you that continuing to be visible right now is creating problems I need to manage, and I need you to understand that." "You mean problems with your wife, problems with my family. You should have thought about your family 4 months ago." He heard her exhale. Not dramatic, just tired. "I knew what this was. I knew from the beginning. I'm not going to make a scene." A pause. "But don't call me and tell me to be professional. I deserve something better than that word." She hung up. He held the phone and looked at the city through the window and thought, for the first time, that he had handled an extraordinary number of things badly in a very compressed period of time. Elena called him. He almost didn't believe it when her name came up on the screen. He thought for a half second that it was a glitch, some technical aberration. Then he answered, "Elena." "I'm not calling to talk about us," she said immediately. Her voice was controlled, deliberate, the voice she used in rooms full of people who needed to believe she was fine. "I'm calling because I think you should know that your mother is worried. Not about the marriage, about you." He sat with that. "What do you mean?" I mean, she's up at 5:30 every morning. I mean, she's making calls she doesn't tell me about. I mean, she's watching the driveway. A beat. Whatever you're doing out there to pressure this situation, she feels it, and she's not scared of you. You should understand that. She is not scared of you, but she's watching something she didn't expect to have to watch, and it's costing her. I haven't done anything. The car, Adrian. He said nothing. I see her at the window, Elena said. She doesn't say anything to me. She goes back to making breakfast. But I see her. Her voice dropped slightly. I don't know what you think sending that car accomplishes, but I need you to know that you're not just doing this to me. You're doing it to her. The line was quiet for a moment. How are you? He said. Not strategy, something actual. She was quiet for a moment, as though the question surprised her. I'm okay, she said. I'm better than I was. The baby is fine. A pause. She moved a lot last night. Strong kick. Something moved in his chest at that. He pressed it down. Elena, I'm not ready to have that conversation yet, she said. I called about your mother, that's all. She paused again. Stop with the car, Adrian. Whatever point you're making, she already understands it. You don't need to keep making it. She hung up. He sat in his office for a long time after that. Then he called the number for the rental agency and told them the car was done. What? The information Danny gathered came back over 3 days in fragments. A name here, a meeting there, nothing dramatic, the kind of intelligence that arrived in pieces and required assembly. What it assembled into was this. Adrian was not moving against Elena directly. He was moving laterally, talking to the people whose opinion of Elena's departure was shaping the larger narrative, working to reframe the story. Not she left me because I betrayed her, but she left under my mother's influence during an emotionally volatile period, and we are working through a private family matter. The distinction was surgical. It didn't accuse Lucia of anything. It just subtly repositioned her from moral authority to meddling presence. Lucia read Danny's notes at the kitchen table on a Wednesday afternoon and felt something cold move through her. Because it was smart. It was exactly the kind of move she would have made herself, at a different table, in a different decade, when she was the one maintaining narratives. She recognized the architecture of it the way you recognize a recipe that came from your own kitchen. She'd taught him that. She had sat across from him when he was 19, 20, 22. And she had explained how information was shaped, how story was the thing that controlled everything beneath it, how the first version of events that landed in people's heads was always the hardest to dislodge. She had taught him, methodically, to think 3 moves ahead. Now he was using it on her. She folded Danny's notes and sat at the table and looked out the window at the garden and thought, how do I respond to something I built? The answer came from an unexpected direction. 3 days after she read Danny's notes, Lucia received a visit from a woman named Carla Benedetti, Sal's wife, a woman Lucia had known for 35 years, who had attended every Valenti dinner and every family occasion, and whose opinion in the social circuitry of their world carried weight that was easy to underestimate if you only tracked the formal power structures. Carla arrived at 2 in the afternoon with a tin of pastries she'd made herself, and the kind of face that was doing too much work to stay neutral. Lucia let her in, made espresso, sat across from her in the front room. Elena was upstairs, napping. They talked about nothing for 10 minutes. Carla asked about the garden, asked about the baby preparations. Then she set down her cup and said, People are saying things, Lucia. They always are. About you. Carla met her eyes. That you've lost perspective, that you're... Some people are saying you're going through something yourself, since Carlo. That this is connected to that. Lucia looked at her. I'm not saying I believe it, Carla said quickly. I'm telling you what's being said. You know how it works. If you don't answer it, it fills in. What would answering it look like? Carla hesitated. Coming back to the table, meeting with Adrian, showing that there's a conversation happening. She folded her hands. Lucia, I love you. I have loved you for 35 years, but I'm watching this and I'm worried that you're standing on principle in a way that's going to isolate you, and I don't want that for you. Lucia looked at her old friend, looked at the specific softness in her face, genuine care, real worry, and underneath both of them, the particular discomfort of someone who has been sent to deliver a message wrapped in affection. Sal sent you, Lucia said. Carla's hands tightened slightly. I came on my own. He told you what to say. He mentioned, Carla, Lucia kept her voice gentle. You've never come to me with pastries in the middle of a Tuesday before, in 35 years. She let that sit. I know you care about me. I know that's real. And I know Sal is trying to find a bridge. She picked up her cup. But I need you to go back and tell whoever is listening that I haven't lost perspective. I have found it, and I understand the difference between those two things, even if other people are choosing not to. Carla left at 3:15. Lucia watched her car go down the drive and then stood in the front room with the pastry tin sitting on the coffee table between the two empty espresso cups. She felt the walls of it now. Not fear. She was past fear in this. But the particular weight of standing in a position that required holding your ground against people who loved you, which was a completely different kind of hard from standing against people who didn't. Enemies were simple. They clarified. People who cared about you and still needed you to move. Those were the ones that wore you down. She was not going to move. But she felt the cost of it more clearly now. Elena came downstairs at 4 and found her in the garden, doing nothing, just standing among the roses with her arms at her sides, looking at nothing in particular. Elena stood in the doorway for a moment before she said anything. Someone came. An old friend, Lucia said. It's handled. Elena came out onto the flagstone path. She stood beside her and looked at the same space Lucia was looking at. He's turning people, she said. Not a question. He's trying to reframe the story. That's different. Lucia turned to look at her. He can reframe it all he wants. The people in this world who know me. And the people who are going to pull back because of what Adrian says, they were never mine to begin with. But it isolates you. It does. And you're still not, no. Lucia said it clean, no hesitation. I'm not. Elena looked at her for a long moment. I keep waiting for the version of this where you tell me it's too much, where the cost gets high enough that you step back. She paused. I wouldn't blame you. I want you to know that. I wouldn't blame you. Lucia looked at her daughter-in-law, looked at the tiredness behind her eyes, the hand that kept going to her stomach, the specific courage of a woman who was holding herself together in someone else's house because her own house had been made uninhabitable. Elena, she said, I've been making calculations in this family for 40 years. I've weighed and measured and strategized and told myself it was for the greater good of the people I loved. She paused. I am done calculating. What I am doing for you right now is the only thing in recent memory I've done without any calculation at all, and that is not something I'm going to walk back. Elena pressed her lips together. Something moved across her face. Not relief exactly, but the thing that lives underneath relief, the structural thing that relief is built on. Thank you, she said. Just that. They stood in the garden until the light went. What? The call came at 9:47 that night, not to Lucia's personal number, to the estate's landline, which almost nobody had anymore, which meant someone had gone to the trouble of finding it. Lucia answered on the third ring. The voice on the other end was a man she knew, Vincent Tucci, who ran a construction front that the family used for 3 different revenue streams and who had been a reliable ally for 14 years. He did not sound like himself. He sounded like a man who had been told to make a call he didn't want to make. Lucia, he said, I need to tell you something. And I need you to understand that I'm telling you because of who you are to me personally, not because of anything else. Tell me, she said. Adrian is calling a sit-down next Friday. Not informal, formal. He's bringing the relevant people together, and he's going to present the situation as a family governance issue. A pause. He's going to argue that Elena being at the estate constitutes an interference with family affairs that needs to be resolved at the organizational level. Lucia was quiet. He's going to ask for a formal position from the table, Vincent said, on whether your actions are within your role or outside it. She understood immediately what that meant. Adrian wasn't coming to her anymore. He wasn't sending Sal or Carla or cars at the end of the driveway. He was going to the table. The formal table. The one that governed how the organization operated. The one that hadn't been formally convened for a family internal matter in over a decade. He was going to ask the men who ran things alongside him to rule on whether his mother's interference was legitimate or whether it constituted a breach that needed correcting. I was going to try to make her position a structural problem rather than a moral one. He was going to try to vote her out of this. When did he decide this? She said. I think, I think it's been building, but the call went out today. Vincent's voice dropped. Lucia, I don't know which way it goes. Some of these men, they respect you, but some of them just want stability and they'll vote for whatever closes the issue fastest. I understand. What are you going to do? She stood in the hallway of the house where she had raised her son, where she had buried her husband, where she had spent 40 years being the woman behind the thing that men talked about when they talked about power in this city. She looked at the photograph on the wall. Carlo, at 40, in a dark suit, looking at the camera with the particular expression of a man who had already decided everything. I'm going to do what I should have done 20 years ago, she said. Which is? She looked at Carlo's photograph for another moment. Show up, she said, and refused to be managed. She hung up the phone, stood in the hallway. The house was quiet around her. Upstairs, Elena was asleep. Lucia went to her study, sat down at the desk, and opened the drawer where she kept the list of names. Her names, the ones that went back before Adrian, before the structure he'd inherited, back to the years when Carlo was building and she was beside him, and her voice at any table in this city carried weight that had nothing to do with her husband's name and everything to do with her own. She started making calls. It was 10:15 on a Wednesday night, and by the time she was done, the sit-down Adrian had planned as a quiet organizational correction was going to become something he had not anticipated at all. She made 11 calls before midnight. Not all of them answered. 3 went to voicemail and she left no message. If they needed a message, they weren't the right people. The 8 who answered listened to her speak for less than 2 minutes each, and when she was done, 7 of them said some version of yes. The 8th said he needed to think about it, and she said, take until tomorrow morning, and he said that would be enough. By the time she went to bed at 12:40, it wasn't settled. Nothing was settled, not in this world, not until the moment itself, but the shape of it had changed. What Adrian had designed as a controlled procedure, a quiet administrative correction wrapped in the language of organizational governance, had been complicated in ways he wouldn't fully see until he walked into the room. She slept 4 hours. Dreamless. In the morning, she told Elena. Not everything. She didn't tell her about the calls, about the names, about what she was building in the background. But she told her about the sit-down, told her what Adrian intended to argue, told her what was coming on Friday. Elena sat at the kitchen table with her hands around her coffee cup and didn't say anything for a full minute. Then she said, he's going to ask a room full of men to vote on whether you were allowed to help me. Essentially. And you're going. I am. Elena looked at her. I don't want you to do this for me. I know. I mean it, Lucia. If this costs you... Elena. Lucia sat down across from her. 20 years ago, when I was doing what I thought needed to be done for this family, I made choices I told myself were necessary. I pressured a woman to stay quiet. I helped close a story that should have been opened. She paused. Not Adrian's story. Before Adrian. His father's. She watched Elena absorb that. I told myself it was for the family. I told myself the woman understood. I have thought about that woman on and off for 20 years, and I cannot tell you her name because I buried it, and I cannot fix what I did because I don't know where she is anymore. She picked up her own cup. I can fix this one. So that is what I'm going to do. Elena said nothing for a moment. Then, who was she? It doesn't matter now. It matters to you. Lucia looked at the table. Her name was Rosa. She worked for a business Carlo was involved in. She was 24 years old, and she had made the mistake of trusting a man who belonged to someone else. A pause. I handled it. Efficiently. And I watched her face when I was done, and I saw what I had made her feel, and I told myself it was the cost of things. She looked up. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about it then, and I knew I was wrong about it then, and I did it anyway. Elena looked at her with something that wasn't pity, something harder and more honest than pity. Recognition, maybe. The look of one woman understanding another woman's accounting. You can't make it right with Rosa by making it right with me, Elena said. No, Lucia agreed. But I can stop making it wrong. The sit-down was Friday at 7 in the evening, at a private dining room on the 3rd floor of a building in Midtown that had been used for these purposes for a long time. The room had no windows. A long table, leather chairs, a credenza with water, and glasses along the far wall. The kind of room where things got decided in the way things got decided in this world. Not by vote exactly, but by the shifting of weight, by who spoke and when, and what the silences between words meant. Adrian arrived first. He was in a dark suit, no tie, his hair neat, his face composed in the particular way that meant he had been preparing for hours. He poured himself water and stood near the head of the table and watched the men come in. Sal, Vincent Tucci, who wouldn't meet his eye, Tommy Carraro, finally present, who shook his hand with slightly more firmness than usual, the grip of a man performing normalcy. 4 others. Delaney from the financial operations, Ruiz who handled the southern distribution, Park whose family had been in business with the Valentis for 8 years, and a man named Otis Webb, who was 67 years old and had sat at more of these tables than anyone else in the room and whose opinion functioned, in practice, as weather. 8 men total, plus Adrian. Lucia arrived at 7:04. She was wearing black, not dramatically, just a black jacket and dark trousers, the clothes of a woman who dressed for function rather than statement. She had done her hair and her face the way she did for any formal occasion. She carried nothing. She walked in and looked at the room the way she'd looked at rooms for 40 years. The specific scan, fast and total, that cataloged who was where and what their bodies were doing. And then she sat down, not at the far end, not positioned in opposition, but midway along the table's left side among the men, as though she had always been invited, which she had not been. Adrian looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes, fast, controlled. "Ma," he said, "this isn't—" "I know what it is," she said. She poured herself water. "Sit down, Adrian." He sat. The room had gone very still. Otis Webb, who had taken the chair at the far end from habit and seniority, watched Lucia with the expression of a man recalibrating something he thought he'd already calculated. Adrian cleared his throat. "I called this meeting because there's a situation affecting the family that's moved outside the private sphere and started to have implications for how we're perceived and how we operate." He kept his voice even, professional, the voice of a man presenting a problem with solutions already prepared. "Elena's departure from our home, and where she's been staying, has generated conversation in places where we can't afford conversation. I want to address that directly and come to a resolution that everyone at this table can stand behind." "What kind of resolution?" Otis said. "Not hostile, just precise. A statement of organizational position, that family matters are handled internally, that individuals within the family structure act in support of that internal process rather than outside it." He paused. "I'm not asking for anything punitive. I'm asking for clarity." Sal said, "And if Lucia disagrees with the position?" "Then she disagrees privately," Adrian said, "like family does." The room absorbed this. A couple of heads nodded slightly. Delaney, Ruiz, Tommy Carraro was looking at the table. Park was watching Lucia. Lucia let it sit for 3 seconds, long enough to be deliberate, short enough not to seem like she was searching for words. Then she said, "Before we talk about what kind of statement this table wants to make, I'd like to talk about what happened in December of 2021. The air in the room changed. Adrian went still. "Ma." His voice came out with a specific quality. Not loud, not aggressive, but with an edge underneath it that she recognized because she had heard it in Carlo's voice in rooms exactly like this one, 30 years ago. The edge that meant, "Stop now, and I will let this go. Keep going, and I won't." She kept going. "In December of 2021, she said, addressing the room and not her son, the Valenti organization reached a financial arrangement with a company called Meridian Capital through a series of property transactions on the west side. Those transactions were structured in a particular way." She paused. "I would like Sal to tell this room how they were structured." Every head turned to Sal. Sal Benedetti was 61 years old and had survived in this world for 30 of them by being the man who kept the wheels turning, who never got his own hands in anything directly, who served as the institutional memory that no organization like this one could function without. He was a careful man. He was also, Lucia had known for 3 years, a man who had been quietly maintaining a parallel set of books on the Meridian transactions, not for the organization, but for himself. Insurance. A hedge. The kind of thing a careful man assembled over decades in case the day ever came when he needed leverage over the thing that had leverage over him. Lucia had known because Sal had told her, not deliberately. He'd said something once, a specific thing, a number that didn't match a number she already knew, and Lucia had been very quiet about understanding what the discrepancy meant and had spent 6 months confirming it before she ever mentioned it to anyone. She had never mentioned it to anyone. Until now. Sal looked at her. His face had gone the color of old paper. Lucia. His voice came out careful, stretched. I don't think this is the appropriate. I think it's exactly appropriate, she said, since we're talking about the integrity of family governance. She looked at Adrian. Your consigliere has been running a separate accounting on the Meridian structure for 4 years. Not everything cleared through the organization's books. Some of it cleared through his. The number, as of the last documentation I'm aware of, is approximately 3.4 million. The room did not erupt. These were not men who erupted. But something happened. A collective recalibration, the invisible machinery of trust shifting on its axis, and Lucia felt it the way you feel a temperature change before you can name the exact degree. Adrian was looking at Sal. Sal was not looking at anyone. He had found a spot on the table approximately 2 feet in front of him, and he was looking at that. Sal, Adrian said. One word. The specific tone of a man who has just had the floor move under him and is not yet certain how far down it goes. It's not, Sal started, stopped. It's more complicated than she's making it sound. Tell me how it's complicated, Adrian said. Still quiet. Still controlled. There were exposures in the early transactions. I moved some liquidity to protect the structure. It was always meant to be returned. When? Said Otis Webb, his first word since the room changed. Sal looked at Otis, opened his mouth, closed it. When was it going to be returned? Otis said again. The same flat, patient tone. Sal said nothing. The room did the math. You could see it happen. The way each man's face went through its own private calculation and arrived at the same place. 3.4 million. 4 years. No disclosure. The word for that wasn't complicated. The word for that was clear, and it was the same word in every language spoken at this table. Adrian pushed his chair back from the table slowly, the way a man moves when he is applying enormous physical control to the impulse to move fast. He stood up. He looked at Sal. You've been with this family since before I was running it. Sal finally looked up. Adrian, I need you to hear me. The full picture. You sat in this room, Adrian said. You sat at my table. You helped me draft the position I was going to use tonight. He stopped. He looked at Lucia. She met his eyes. And in that moment, she watched him understand it completely. Not just the Sal situation. He'd worked through that. That was a solvable problem. Ugly, but bounded. What he understood in that moment was the full architecture of what had just happened. She hadn't just walked into his meeting. She had walked in with something that made the meeting's original purpose irrelevant. She had detonated the room from the inside using a piece of information she'd been holding for years. And she had chosen to use it here now, at the precise moment he had tried to use a room full of men to limit her. He had tried to bring institutional weight against her. She had picked up the institution and thrown it. You knew, he said, not loud, almost conversational. You knew about Sal for how long? Long enough, she said, and you sat on it. He looked at her. Why? Because I wasn't sure I was right. She held his gaze. And because I hoped I was wrong. And because I knew that using it would burn something that couldn't be rebuilt. She paused. I didn't want to use it, Adrian. You gave me no other option. He stood at the head of the table in the windowless room with 7 men who had just watched his consigliere. The man he'd trusted most, the man who had been architecture, not furniture, get exposed by his mother in front of all of them. He stood there and he breathed, and his face was doing something very controlled and very difficult. Then he said, Sal, leave. Sal rose from his chair. He looked at Lucia once. Not with anger, she noticed. With something more complicated than anger. A look that said, I always knew you had it. I never thought you'd use it. I should have known. He picked up his jacket and walked to the door and left, and the door closed behind him, and the room rearranged itself around his absence. Nobody spoke. Adrian sat back down. He put his hands flat on the table. He breathed through his nose once, slowly, the way she'd taught him when he was a teenager, when he was learning to keep his face from showing what his chest was doing. She had taught him that too. "All right," he said to the room, "this meeting is adjourned." He looked around the table, Otis, Tommy, Vincent, the others. "What happened with Sal stays in this room until I've had time to review the full picture. I will be in contact with each of you individually." He paused. "Thank you for being here." Men stood. Chairs moved. The room began to empty with the particular efficiency of people who understood that the faster they left, the less they'd be asked to account for what they'd witnessed. Vincent Tucci passed Lucia on his way out and touched her shoulder briefly, a small gesture, almost invisible, and kept walking. In 2 minutes, the room held 3 people, Adrian, Lucia, and Otis Webb, who had not moved. Otis looked at Lucia, then at Adrian, then back at Lucia. 40 years, he said. "I've been watching Lucia Valenti at tables in this city for 40 years. He stood slowly, the way old men stand when they've decided something. "You should listen to her." He said it to Adrian, without judgment, without drama, the way you state something that has simply become visible. "That's all." He nodded to Lucia and walked out. The door closed. Adrian and Lucia sat alone in the windowless room. He didn't speak for almost 2 minutes. She didn't push him. She sat with her water glass and let the silence do what it needed to do, because she knew her son, and she knew that the version of him that talked before he was ready was not the version she could reach. Finally he said, "How long have you been watching me fail?" "That's not what this was. That's what it felt like." His voice came out rougher than usual. The control was still there, but it was working harder. "Standing in front of the people, He stopped. "You could have come to me. You could have told me about Sal privately, years ago. We could have handled it." "I know." "Then why?" "Because I wasn't just holding information about Sal," she said. "I was holding it for a moment when I needed it to say something larger. And I'm sorry for that, Adrian. I want you to hear me say that. Using it tonight was not a clean thing. I am not pretending it was." He looked at her. "But you'd do it again." "In the same circumstances?" "Yes." He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, pushed back from the table, walked to the credenza and poured water and stood with his back to her for a moment. "Sal," he said, 4 years. He shook his head. "I had the wrong person in the right chair." "You did." "And I didn't see it." "No." "You did." "Yes." He turned around. He looked at his mother across the long table in the windowless room, and something in his face had changed. The architecture of it, the way it was organized. The layer of performance that Adrian Valenti wore the way other men wore clothing, the face he showed to rooms of people who were assessing him constantly, had slipped in a way she hadn't seen since he was a boy. What was underneath was younger. Not weak. Younger. "What do I do about Sal?" he said. "That's not why I'm here tonight." "I know it's not, but I'm asking." She thought about it. "Review everything. Don't act until you have the full picture. Don't punish what you can't prove, and don't prove less than everything." She paused. "And don't let the anger make the decision. You know how your anger makes decisions." He absorbed this. "And Elena." The name landed differently in the room, quieter, more exposed. "What about her?" Lucia said. "What do I do about Elena?" He said it the same way he'd asked about Sal. Not as a man who expected an easy answer, but as a man who had run out of the kind of thinking that produced easy answers and was asking a different kind of question entirely. Lucia looked at her son. She looked at him for a long moment, at the 53 years of him, the boy who cried once and decided never to cry again, the young man who learned to turn every room into a chessboard, the husband who had been given something real and treated it as a resource. "You don't do anything about Elena," she said. "Elena is not a problem to solve. Elena is a person you hurt. Those are not the same category, and you have been treating them like they are since the beginning." He was quiet. "If you want to fix something," she said, "fix yourself. Not for her. Not to get her back. For you. Because the version of you that did what you did is a version that will do it again, and you know that, and she knows that, and everyone in this room tonight knew that even if they weren't saying it." She stood. "You are a man who has spent his whole life making sure he was the one holding the leverage. The problem is that you brought that into your marriage. You held it over the woman you should have trusted completely." He didn't flinch. But he didn't argue either. I'm going home, Lucia said. She picked up her jacket. I'm going to check on Elena and I'm going to make sure she had dinner, and then I am going to sleep, because this has been a very long week, and I am 63 years old. She moved toward the door. You should go home too, to the house. Sit in it. Let it be quiet. She stopped at the door. And Adrian, he looked at her. The next time you think about calling a room full of men to weigh in on a decision that belongs between two people, she paused. Remember tonight. Remember what happens when you make private things into organizational problems. The organization does not protect the private, it consumes it. She walked out. He stayed in the room for a while. Nobody came back. The building settled around him, the particular silence of a place built to hold things that didn't get written down. He sat at the head of the table and looked at the chair where Sal had been sitting. 4 years. The man had been in his house for dinners. At the hospital when Carlo Jr. was born, he caught himself, the name of the baby they'd chosen without telling anyone. He had been at every significant moment, and he had been running a separate ledger the entire time. The thing that kept snagging in Adrian's mind, the thing he couldn't move past, was not the money. The money was fixable. The money was just money. What he couldn't stop returning to was the specific arithmetic of loyalty. How many people had he held in his hand believing they were solid, while underneath they were doing something else entirely? Sal. Simone. Himself. He thought about Elena in Westchester. He thought about her at the kitchen table in the mornings, running the charity accounts on her laptop, being efficient and careful and good at things he'd never acknowledged she was good at, because acknowledging competence meant acknowledging an equal, and he saw it clearly now, in the empty room, with nobody to perform for. He had never truly let her be his equal. He had loved her the way powerful men often loved women, as the best version of an accessory, as something chosen rather than encountered. He had never really encountered her. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes and sat like that for a moment, in the dark behind his own hands, and felt something in his chest that he did not have a practiced word for, because he had spent 30 years systematically eliminating the vocabulary for it. When he lowered his hands, the room was the same. The table, the chairs, the credenza, the door. He thought, I have to call Marcus. Not to ask about Elena. Not to extract information or manage a situation. Just Marcus had known. Marcus had been the one who told her. And Adrian had not spoken to Marcus since that morning when he'd realized where the information had come from, and he had done the thing he always did, which was file it under future action and leave it there while he worked the larger problem. Marcus had done a hard thing. He had looked at his loyalty to Adrian and his loyalty to what was right, and he had chosen what was right. Adrian sat in the empty room and thought about that for a long time. Then his phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. 4 words. He read it twice. He read it a third time and felt the bottom drop out of something. The text said, Simone Arquette is pregnant. He sat with the phone in his hand for 60 seconds without moving. The text was still there when he looked again. Same 4 words. The room hadn't changed. The table, the chairs, the empty water glasses, the door. Everything the same. But something in his chest had rearranged itself in a way that felt permanent. Not pain exactly, more like the specific internal sensation of a structure discovering it was built wrong. Simone Arquette is pregnant. He didn't know the number. He stared at it, unlisted, no name, the kind of number that existed specifically to deliver information and then disappear. Someone who knew. Someone who had decided he needed to know tonight, in this room, after everything that had already happened in this room. The timing was not accidental. Nothing in his world was ever accidental. He put the phone in his pocket, stood up, walked to the credenza and poured water and drank it and set the glass down and stood there with both hands on the edge of the credenza, looking at the wall and breathing through his nose the way his mother had taught him. In for 4. Out for 4. He did it 3 times and it did not help. He called the unlisted number. It rang 6 times and went to a generic voicemail prompt. No name, no message. He hung up. He thought about calling Simone. He stood there for a full minute thinking about calling Simone, and then he put the phone back in his pocket because there was no version of that call he was ready to make. Standing in this room at 8:30 at night with his consigliere's exposure still hanging in the air and his mother's voice still in his ears. He walked out, down the stairs, through the lobby, into the street. The city was doing its normal Friday night thing. People, noise, the particular density of Manhattan in the evening, bodies moving in all directions with the focused purposelessness of people who have places to go that don't matter. He stood on the sidewalk and felt the cold air on his face and thought, this is how it ends. Not in the room, not at the table, not through any of the machinery he'd built to manage the way things ended. It ends on a sidewalk with a 4-word text message and the understanding that there is no version of the next conversation that doesn't destroy something. He got in his car and drove. Not home. He drove without deciding where he was driving, which was something he never did. And after 20 minutes, he was on the West Side Highway heading north, and the city was falling away behind him, and he understood, without having consciously decided it, that he was going to Westchester. Lucia heard the car on the gravel at 10:15. She was in the kitchen, still dressed, because she had been home for an hour and had not been able to make herself go upstairs. She'd sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that went cold and thought about the room and Sal's face and the way Adrian had looked when he understood what she'd done. She'd thought about Rosa, which she always thought about in the aftermath of hard things. Rosa, who was now 40. Something years old somewhere in this world living whatever life she'd built after Lucia Valenti removed one of its foundations. She heard the car. She knew the sound of his engine. She stood up. Elena appeared at the kitchen door in her robe, hair loose, one hand on the doorframe. Who is it? Adrian, go upstairs. Elena looked at her. Please, Lucia said. I need to talk to him first. I'll call you when it's time. Elena held her gaze for a moment. That steady, careful gaze she'd developed over the weeks. The look of a woman who had decided to trust someone and was still in the daily process of honoring that decision. Then she nodded and went back up the stairs. Lucia went to the front door and opened it before he could knock. He was standing on the step in the same dark suit from the meeting, his tie gone, the top button of his shirt open. He looked like a man who had been driving for a while. His face was different from the face she'd left in the room an hour ago. Something had happened between there and here. What is it? She said. He held up the phone. She took it, read the text. She read it again. She handed the phone back. Come inside, she said. They sat in the front room, not the kitchen. The kitchen was too ordinary for this. The front room was the formal room, the room that held the good furniture and the photographs and the particular formality of occasions. And Lucia chose it deliberately because she needed the weight of it right now. She needed walls that had seen things. She sat in the chair across from him. He sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, phone face down on the cushion beside him. How far along? She said. I don't know. Have you called her? Not yet. When did you end it with her? I called her, the day after. He stopped. She didn't take it simply. Lucia absorbed this. Is this the reason for the text? Someone wants you to know that ending it has consequences? Or someone wants to make sure Elena knows before I can manage the information? He looked up. Someone with the number is in her world. Or mine. I don't know which yet. Does it matter which? It matters for what comes next. Adrian. She said it flat. What comes next is not an information problem. What comes next is that there is a woman in this situation who is pregnant. What comes next is that your wife is asleep upstairs. What comes next is a human accounting, not a tactical one. She paused. Is it yours? He was quiet for 2 seconds. I don't know. But it could be. Yes. She sat with that. Sat with the specific weight of it. The baby upstairs in Elena's body. The possible baby somewhere in the city, in Simone Arquette's body. The two of them existing simultaneously in a world that had been built on the premise that Adrian Valenti controlled the terms of everything. You have to tell Elena, Lucia said. I know. Tonight. He looked up. She's asleep. Not anymore. Lucia stood. She heard the car. She's been awake since you pulled in. She looked at him steadily. You don't get to choose the timing on this one. You've already chosen enough timings. He said nothing. I'm going to, Lucia said. And I'm going to be in this room when you tell her, because I will not leave her alone with this information, and I will not leave you alone to frame it. She moved toward the door. Whatever face you are going to put on it, take it off. Just say the words. She went upstairs. Elena was sitting on the edge of the bed, not lying down, sitting straight, feet on the floor, hands in her lap, in the posture of a woman who has been waiting with her whole body. She looked at Lucia's face in the doorway and said, "What happened?" "Adrian needs to tell you something. Come downstairs." "Tell me now." "Elena, tell me now." Her voice was steady, and her eyes were steady, and her hands in her lap were perfectly still, in the way that meant she was holding them still by will. "I don't want to walk into a room and hear it with his face in front of me until I know what it is. Tell me." Lucia stood in the doorway. She thought about what was right and what was kind, and whether those were the same thing in this moment. "Simone Arquette may be pregnant," she said. The room was quiet. Elena's hands stayed still. Her face went through something. Not one emotion, a sequence of them, fast, almost too fast to track, and then it settled into a stillness that was different from before, heavier, more final. She stood up. She walked past Lucia, out the door, down the stairs. He heard her on the stairs. He stood up automatically. Some physical reflex, the ingrained motion of a man who stood when women entered rooms, which now felt grotesque in its normalcy. He was standing when she came through the door, and she stopped 4 feet from him and looked at him and said nothing. He had prepared words on the drive up. He had thought about how to present it, the uncertainty, the timeline, the fact that it might not be his, the fact that he had ended it, the fact that he looked at her face and every prepared word dissolved. "I got a text tonight," he said. "Someone telling me Simone is pregnant." Elena was looking at him with an expression he didn't have a name for. Not the grief face from 3 weeks ago. Not the controlled face from their phone call. Something more stripped than either of those. "Is it yours?" she said. "I don't know." She breathed in through her nose, out. "How long were you with her?" "I told you, 4 months." "Then it could be yours." "Yes." She nodded once. A small movement, almost mechanical, like her head was confirming data her body had already processed. She put her hand on her stomach. It was not a dramatic gesture. It was just where her hand went. "So there are 2, she said. He didn't answer because there was no answer. "There are 2 children, she said. "Potentially, yours, at the same time." She looked at him. "You did understand that this was a possible consequence of what you were doing." "Elena, did you understand that?" "I didn't think—" "You didn't think." Her voice didn't rise. That was the thing. It didn't rise. It didn't break. It stayed at exactly the same register, and somehow that was worse than anything loud would have been. "For 4 months. You didn't think." He opened his mouth, closed it. "Get out of this house," she said. "I need you to hear me." "I have heard you." She took a step toward him, which surprised him enough that he actually stepped back. She was 7 months pregnant and barefoot, and she stepped toward him like someone who had decided to take up her full amount of space for the first time. "I have heard everything you have said to me in the last 3 weeks. I heard you when you came to the door with coffee. I heard you when you called me and asked how the baby was moving. I heard you an hour ago when you couldn't say the words, so your mother said them for you." She stopped 3 feet from him. "I have heard all of it, and now I need you to hear me, one time, clearly." He waited. "I am done," she said. "Not angry done. Not I need space done. Done. The marriage, the house, the name. Done. Whatever happens with Simone Arquette, whatever that child is or isn't, that is a thing you will handle, and you will handle it without me inside it." She paused. "And I need you to leave this house right now, because I am standing here holding myself together by about 3 inches, and I don't want to fall apart in front of you." He stood there for a moment. He stood there and looked at her, really looked at her, the way he had not looked at her in a very long time. The way you look at something when you understand you are seeing it for one of the last times. And something moved across his face that had no strategy in it at all. "I'm sorry," he said. Not the managed sorry, something actual, something that came from lower down. "I know," she said. "Go." He went. Lucia found Elena in the front room standing at the window, watching the taillights of his car disappear down the drive. She didn't go to her immediately. She stood in the doorway and waited. Elena stood at the window for a while. Then she turned around and her face was wet, and she looked at Lucia and said, "I told him to go." "I heard." "I meant it." "I know you did." Elena wiped her face with the back of her hand. What happens now? Lucia crossed the room. She sat down on the couch and patted the cushion beside her, and Elena came and sat, and Lucia put an arm around her and felt the specific weight of her, the exhaustion, the baby, the 3 weeks of held togetherness, finally finding permission to come apart a little. Now we deal with it one piece at a time, Lucia said. In the morning. What about, Elena stopped, if there's another child, his, out there? Then that child exists, and we deal with that fact when we have confirmed facts to deal with. She held her steady. Not tonight. Tonight you breathe. Elena pressed her face into Lucia's shoulder and let out a breath that had been held for, by the sound of it, approximately 3 weeks. It wasn't crying exactly. It was more structural than that. The sound of a load-bearing wall finally admitting the weight. Lucia held her and looked at the room and thought about what came next. What came next arrived faster than either of them expected. At 7 the next morning, Lucia's phone rang. She was already up, in the kitchen, and she answered and heard Vincent Tucci's voice. And Vincent's voice told her that Sal Benedetti had spent the night making his own calls, and that those calls had gone to people Lucia did not have relationships with, and that the story Sal was now circulating was not the story of a man caught skimming. The story Sal was circulating was that the Meridian discrepancy had been authorized, quietly, verbally, by Lucia herself 3 years ago, as a private arrangement she'd maintained outside Adrian's knowledge to ensure her own financial independence from the family if it ever became necessary. Lucia set her coffee cup down very carefully. It was a lie. It was a specific, targeted, structurally credible lie. Credible because Lucia was a woman who had independent resources, who was known to be privately careful, who had in fact maintained certain personal accounts that Adrian knew about and hadn't examined closely because they were hers, and he had always trusted her on money, even when he trusted her on nothing else. Sal had taken that known truth and built a plausible fiction around it, and the fiction was designed to do one thing: make Lucia's exposure of him look like a preemptive strike against someone who knew her own secret. He was going to flip the accounting. He was going to make her the story. Who has he talked to? Lucia said. Delaney, Park, 2 people I don't know. Vincent paused. He hasn't talked to Adrian yet. I think he's building the audience before he goes to the source. How much time do I have? He's calling Adrian at 9. It was 7:12. Thank you, Vincent, she said. She hung up. She stood in the kitchen and looked out at the garden and felt, for the first time in this entire ordeal, the specific cold of being targeted. Not pressured, not challenged, not managed. Targeted. Sal was not trying to apply pressure or reframe a narrative. Sal was trying to burn her down before she could finish burning him. And he had a story that would work on the people who didn't know her, and he had an hour and 48 minutes before it reached Adrian. She picked up the phone and called Adrian. He answered on the first ring. He hadn't been sleeping either. Sal is going to call you at 9, she said. I need you to hear me before he does. A pause. What is he going to say? She told him, all of it, the lie, the structure of it, the way it would sound, the specific details Sal would use that would make it seem plausible. She told him straight, the way she'd told him things when he was young and the world was still something she could explain to him rather than something they moved through separately. When she was done, the line was quiet for a moment. Is any of it true? He said. No. The private accounts exist, yes. Contain what they contain, yes. Have nothing to do with Meridian, yes. She paused. Do you believe me? The question cost her something to ask. She felt it leave her. The particular expenditure of a woman who had never before needed to ask her own son whether he believed her, because it had never before been in question. Adrian was quiet for 3 full seconds. Yes, he said. I believe you. She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. What do you need from me? He said. I need you to not take Sal's call at 9. I need you to let it go to voicemail. And I need you to come here, not to see Elena, not to try to fix anything with her, just, I need you here when I make the next call, because the next call needs to have your voice behind it, not just mine. Who are you calling? Otis Webb, she said. He's the one Sal hasn't reached yet. He's the one that matters. Another pause. You're sure? I've been sure about Otis for 40 years, she said. Get in the car. She hung up, stood in the kitchen, looked at the clock. 7:16, 54 minutes. She opened the refrigerator and took out eggs and butter because her hands needed something to do, and because Elena would need to eat, and because in her experience the most important things in life got done in between the ordinary ones, in the gaps where your body kept moving while your mind worked the problem. She cracked the first egg and heard the sound of Elena coming down the stairs, and she thought, hold the line. Just hold the line until Adrian gets here. She was still thinking it when her phone buzzed on the counter with a message from a number she didn't recognize. She looked at it. The message was a photograph, a document, legal, formatted, 3 pages compressed into a single image. She expanded it, read the header, read the first paragraph, read the date. She set the spatula down. The document was a deed of transfer. Property on the Upper East Side, a building she knew. A building that had been in the Valenti name for 22 years, that Carlo had acquired in 1999, that she had always understood to be part of the family's legitimate holdings. The transfer was dated 14 months ago. The transferee was a holding company she had never heard of. The signature at the bottom was hers. Her name. Her signature. On a document she had never seen in her life. She stood at the stove with the eggs going cold in the pan and felt the floor of things shift in a way it had not shifted before. Not the manageable shift of a difficult situation, not the recoverable shift of a battle being fought on known terrain. This was different. Sal hadn't just built a story. Sal had built evidence. And whoever had sent this photograph had waited until precisely this moment, 7:19 in the morning, 51 minutes before Sal's call, while she was standing in her kitchen thinking she had the situation bounded, to make sure she understood that the ground beneath her was not what she thought it was, and that the next 51 minutes were going to determine whether she survived this or whether Sal Benedetti walked out of the ashes of his own exposure, carrying her reputation in his hands like a trophy. She turned off the burner, picked up the phone, called Adrian back. He answered in 2 rings. "I'm already in the car. Drive faster," she said. Adrian made it in 31 minutes. Lucia heard the car on the gravel at 7:50, and she was already at the front door when he came up the steps, still in the clothes from last night, jacket gone, moving fast. She held up the phone before he could speak. He took it, read the document image twice. His face did something tight and controlled, and then went still. "That's your signature," he said. "That is not my signature." He looked at it again. I know what it looks like." She took the phone back. "It was made to look. That's the point." She moved into the hallway. "Come inside, we have 31 minutes. He followed her to the study. The room was small and organized. Bookshelves, a desk, one window facing the side garden. The room where she paid bills and wrote letters and kept the records she kept in the particular way that a woman who had navigated this world for 40 years kept records. Thorough, redundant, and known to exactly one other person besides herself. She opened the bottom drawer of the desk and took out a binder. Not a digital file, not a cloud storage, not anything that could be accessed or altered remotely. A physical binder, tabbed and dated, the kind of record that predated the digital age and survived it specifically because it was analog. She put it on the desk, opened it to a section near the back. "Every property transaction I've been involved in for the last 12 years, she said. Every signature, every notarization, witnessed and dated and cross-referenced. She found the page she was looking for and turned the binder toward him. Upper East Side property, 2003 acquisition, Carlo's name. My signature is co-signatory on the original deed, she pointed. Look at the signature. He looked at the binder. Then he pulled up the document photograph on his phone and held them side by side. After a moment he said, the loop on the L. My L has never closed at the top, not once in 63 years. She pointed to the photograph on his phone. That L closes. Whoever made this was good, but they worked from something digital. A scan of something I signed, isolated the signature, transposed it. They didn't know the habit. Adrian set the phone down. He looked at his mother. Sal had access to your signed documents. For decades. She closed the binder. Board filings, trust administration, any number of things passed through consigliere review over the years that carried my signature. So he built this over time. He built the capability over time. He deployed it when I deployed what I knew about Meridian. She sat down. He had this ready, Adrian. This wasn't improvised overnight. He has been holding this the way I held Meridian. Insurance. She paused. The difference is that what I held was true. Adrian sat in the chair across from the desk. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and rubbed his face with both hands and held them there for a moment. The gesture of a man processing several catastrophic realizations simultaneously and refusing to let any of them make him stupid. He lowered his hands. We have 28 minutes before he calls me. Yes. Otis. Otis, she confirmed. He's the one Sal needs to convince last. He's the one whose position on this becomes everyone else's position. If Sal gets to him with this document before we do, it doesn't matter what the binder shows. The story will have already taken root. Then call him now. I want you on the call. I want him to hear your voice confirming what I'm saying before I show him the binder. She looked at him steadily. Because here's the thing, Adrian. Otis is going to ask you directly. He will ask you if you believe me. And I need you to know, before you answer him, that if there is any part of you that isn't certain, I would rather you tell me that now than tell him something you don't mean. The room was very quiet. Adrian looked at his mother, looked at her the way he had not looked at her in the windowless room. Fully, without the layer of management, without the calculation of what he needed from her. Just looked at her, the woman who had raised him in this house, who had sat at every table that mattered, who had burned her own position in his organization to stand next to a woman he'd wronged, who had then walked into the room where he was trying to limit her and detonated it from the inside, and who was now sitting across from him at 7:53 in the morning with a physical binder of evidence and 30 minutes to save her own name. I'm certain, he said. She picked up the phone, called Otis Webb. Otis answered on the third ring, which meant he was awake and had been for a while. Lucia put the phone on speaker and set it on the desk between them. Otis, she said, I'm here with Adrian. We need you to hear something before 9 o'clock. A pause. I figured someone would be calling. His voice was the same as always, unhurried, the voice of a man who had outlasted everyone's urgency by refusing to match it. Sal called me last night. Lucia and Adrian looked at each other. Tell me what he said, Lucia said. Otis told them. It was close to what she'd anticipated. The meridian framing, the suggestion of a private arrangement, the implication that her move at the table had been self-protective rather than principled. He'd added details she hadn't expected, a specific dollar amount, a specific date, the name of a lawyer who had allegedly witnessed the arrangement. The lawyer's name was a man who had died in 2022, which meant he couldn't be asked and couldn't contradict. Sal had chosen his witness carefully. When Otis finished, she said, None of it is true. I can show you the documentation, not digitally, physically, the original binder I've kept for 12 years. She paused. And the signature on the transfer document Sal is using is forged. The specific way I formed the letter L has been consistent my entire life. The forged signature does not match. Silence. Otis, Adrian said, I'm sitting here because I believe her, not because she's my mother, because I've looked at the evidence and the story doesn't hold. He paused. Sal had 4 years to build this. He built it well, but he built it from digital copies of her signatures, and he missed the detail. Another silence. Longer. The lawyer he named, Otis said finally. Caruso. Dead 2 years, Lucia said. I know when Caruso died. A pause. Sal knows too. The weight of that observation settled over the call. Otis was not saying it accidentally. He was saying, I already noticed the problem. He was saying, I was already doing the math before you called. You need to come here, Otis said. Both of you. Bring the binder. I want to see it with my own eyes. A pause. 8:30. My place. He hung up. Lucia looked at Adrian. Go wash your face, she said. You look like you drove here from the bottom of the ocean. Something moved across his face. Not quite a laugh, the ghost of one. He stood and went to the bathroom, and she heard the water run, and she sat for a moment in the study with the binder in front of her and thought about Sal Benedetti. Thought about 35 years of shared tables and shared history, and the specific slow construction of a betrayal that had been built so carefully and over so long a time that she wondered now when it had started, whether it had always been there, underneath, or whether it had grown in the gaps of her attention. She thought, people become what they're afraid of losing. Sal had been afraid of losing his position for 30 years, and that fear had curdled into something that made forging a widow's signature feel like self-preservation. She didn't forgive him, but she understood the shape of it, and understanding the shape of it made her tired in a way that anger wouldn't have. She heard Elena in the kitchen, heard the kettle, heard the careful movements of a woman navigating someone else's house in the early morning, trying to take up the right amount of space. Not too much, not invisible, something honest in between. Lucia got up and went to the kitchen doorway. Elena was at the counter in her robe, making tea, and she turned when she heard Lucia and looked at her face and said, "How bad?" "Manageable," Lucia said. "Adrian's here. We're going to see someone at 8:30. Elena looked past her toward the hallway. "He's here. He came when I called. He's in the bathroom." She came into the kitchen. "He's not here for you. I want you to know that. He came because I needed him." Elena turned back to the kettle, poured. "Is he all right?" "He will be." Lucia went to the cabinet, got a cup, set it on the counter. "Elena, when this is resolved, when today is done, I want to talk to you about what comes next, practically. Not the marriage, not Adrian, practically. Where you live, how you're set, what you have." She paused. "You should not be making decisions from a position of having nothing of your own. I want to make sure you have something of your own." Elena was quiet for a moment. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." Lucia put her hand briefly on Elena's arm. "I want to." Adrian appeared in the kitchen doorway. His face was washed, his eyes still carrying the previous night's weight, but he was composed in the way he was always composed, the gathered quality of a man who had decided what the next hour required and was meeting it. He looked at Elena. She looked at him. The kitchen held both of them in the particular silence of two people who have said the necessary things and don't have new ones yet. "I'm sorry about last night," he said. "I shouldn't have come here without calling." Elena wrapped both hands around her cup. "You needed your mother," she said. Not unkind, just true. He nodded once. His eyes went to her stomach, that brief involuntary check, and then back to her face. "How are you feeling?" "I'm all right." "The baby is fine, Adrian." She said it gently. The sharpness from the night before had burned down into something flatter and more durable. "She's fine." He stood in the doorway for another moment. Then he said, "I'm going to deal with Simone, not manage it, deal with it. Whatever the situation is, she'll have what she needs. I want you to know that I'm not going to make that into another thing you have to worry about." Elena looked at him steadily. "I know," she said. "I believe you can do that. I just can't be inside it." She paused. "Take care of it, Adrian, whatever it is. Take care of it right." He nodded. He looked at her for one more moment, and there was something in that look, something that had no performance in it, no strategy, just a man looking at the woman he had failed with the specific knowledge of exactly how and what it cost. And then he looked at his mother. "We should go." Otis Webb lived in a brownstone in the West 70s that he'd owned since 1987 and would own until he died, which he showed no signs of doing anytime soon. He met them at the door in a cardigan and reading glasses and let them in without ceremony. His house was full of books and organized clutter and the smell of coffee that had been going for hours. He led them to a sitting room and pointed at chairs and sat across from them and held out his hand for the binder without saying anything. He read for 11 minutes. He read the way he did everything, without hurry, without performance, turning pages in the specific way of someone who read documents for meaning rather than narrative. He looked at the original signature on the 2003 deed. He looked at the photograph of the forged document on Adrian's phone. He looked at the L. He closed the binder, handed it back. "Sal made a mistake," he said. "Several," Lucia said. "The specific one I mean is that he forgot you're smarter than he is." Otis took off his reading glasses. "He's always forgotten that. For 30 years he managed it by being useful enough that it didn't matter. Once he wasn't useful anymore, he had nothing left to manage it with." He looked at Adrian. "What are you going to do?" "Audit everything he touched going back 4 years," Adrian said. "Full review. Whatever came out of Meridian, whatever else he was running, I want the complete picture before I make any decisions." "That's the right answer." Otis looked at Lucia. "The document. You want it buried or you want it exposed?" "I want it on record as fraudulent," she said. "Not buried. On record. I'm not spending the next 10 years wondering who still has a copy." Otis nodded. "I know someone. She'll examine it, certify the forgery, and file the finding somewhere that counts." He stood, which was the signal that the meeting was done. Lucia. He looked at her, and in his look was the weight of 40 years, the whole history of what she'd been in this world and what it had cost and what it hadn't. You should have been at those tables from the beginning. She stood. I was, she said. Nobody wrote my name on the chair. He almost smiled. No, they didn't. He shook Adrian's hand. He kissed Lucia's cheek. The formal, old-world gesture. The one that in this context meant more than affection. It meant standing. Call me when it's done, he said, and he walked them to the door. In the car on the way back, they didn't talk for the first 10 minutes. The city moved past the windows, ordinary and vast, doing its Saturday morning thing. Adrian drove. Lucia sat with the binder in her lap and looked at the buildings and felt the specific exhaustion of a thing being over. Not resolved in the sense of clean. Nothing in this world resolved cleanly, but over in the sense of the acute crisis passing into the longer, slower work of aftermath. Simone called me, Adrian said. He said it to the windshield. This morning, while I was driving, I didn't answer. Lucia waited. I'm going to call her back today, find out what's true and what the situation is and what she needs. He paused. Not because I have feelings for her, because it's the right thing. Because if there's a child... He stopped. There's a child. And I have to be honest about that. Yes, Lucia said. You do. Elena's not going to come back. No. I know that. I've known it since she said it last night. He changed lanes. I keep running the scenario where I do something different 3 years ago, 5 years ago. At the beginning, when I first started treating the marriage like something I managed rather than something I was in. He shook his head slowly. I can't find the version where I make a different choice, because every version requires me being different from what I was. And I wasn't different. I was exactly what I was. You can be different now, Lucia said. For what? For your children, both of them. She looked at his profile. And for yourself. Not for Elena, not to repair what can't be repaired. For yourself. Because the version of you that exists on the other side of this is only worth having if it's actually different. He was quiet for a while. Outside, the city thinned as they moved north, the density giving way to width, to sky. I've been thinking about Marcus, he said. What about him? He did a hard thing. He told Elena because it was right, not because it served him. It cost him. He knew what it would cost him with me. He kept his eyes on the road. I want to talk to him. Not to reestablish anything, not for organizational reasons. Just, I want to tell him I understand what he did. Lucia looked at her son. Do that first, she said. Before anything else. Do that first. Sal Benedetti was confronted on a Monday morning 9 days later in a meeting with Adrian and 2 of the organization's private attorneys and the forensic document examiner Otis had arranged. She was a small, precise woman named Dr. Catherine Lowe, who had spent 20 years certifying and disputing signatures for courts and arbitration panels, and she laid the findings out in 11 minutes with the specific impersonal authority of someone who dealt exclusively in what the evidence showed and had no investment in what anyone felt about it. The L, the pressure pattern, the angle of the upstroke on the I in Lucia. 3 separate markers that confirmed the signature was transposed from a digitally scanned source document rather than produced by hand. Sal sat through all 11 minutes without speaking. He was wearing a gray suit. His hands were folded on the table. He looked like a man who had known this morning was coming and had decided to meet it by being very still. When Dr. Lowe finished, she collected her materials and left, and the 2 attorneys stepped out, and it was just Adrian and Sal in the room. Sal looked at him. How'd she get you in the car? He said. Adrian looked back. She called me and told me the truth, he said. That's all she did. Sal made a small sound. Not a laugh. The ghost of one, like Lucia's ghost of a laugh in the kitchen that morning. Simple, he said. It was, Adrian said. Turns out simple is what I kept making complicated. Sal looked at the table. The Meridian money, he said. I want you to know, it wasn't to hurt you. I know. It was fear. He said it plainly, without self-pity. I've been afraid of what happens to a man in this world when he stops being useful. I was building something that was mine, separate, that I controlled. He paused. I've been watching my whole life be contingent on other people's decisions. I didn't want to be contingent anymore. Adrian was quiet. I understand that, he said finally. I understand it better than I would have 2 months ago. He put his hands flat on the table. The Meridian amount comes back in full, audited and accounted for. You're done in any role connected to this organization. That's not negotiable, and it's not punitive. It's just what it is. He paused. But I'm not coming after you beyond that. The years before this, the work you did before the fear got ahead of everything else, that counts for something, so I'm letting you walk. Sal looked up. Don't make me regret that, Adrian said. Sal stood. He was 61 years old, and he looked older than that in this room, on this morning, with this specific weight on him. He picked up his jacket. He didn't offer his hand, and Adrian didn't offer his. At the door, Sal stopped, didn't turn around. Tell Lucia, he started. Stopped. Tell her I'm sorry, for the document, for all of it. A pause. She'll know I mean it. He walked out. The following Saturday, Simone Arquette confirmed what the text had said. She was 11 weeks pregnant. She told Adrian in a conversation that lasted 40 minutes and contained, on both sides, very little of what either of them had expected to say and more of what they actually meant. She was not what he had told himself she was during the affair. Not the simple version, the uncomplicated relief from a marriage he'd been neglecting. She was a woman who had made her own decisions with her own eyes open and was now in a situation she hadn't fully accounted for and was navigating it with more steadiness than he deserved. He told her he would be present, not as her partner, that was done, and they both knew it, but as a father. Consistently, without drama, without the conditions he put on everything else in his life. She looked at him for a long moment. I'll believe it when I see it, she said. That's fair, he said. He meant it. And for the first time in a long time, meaning something and saying something were the same act. Elena Moretti gave birth on a Thursday morning in late spring. A girl, 7 pounds 4 ounces, with dark hair and the particular furious expression of a person who has been forced out of somewhere warm and is making her feelings known about it. Lucia was in the waiting room. She'd been there since 4 in the morning when Elena's water broke and Danny drove them both to the hospital. She sat with her coat in her lap and a cup of coffee she'd gotten from the vending machine, and she waited the way she'd waited for things her whole life. Not peacefully, because peace was for people who didn't understand what was at stake, but with the focused stillness of someone who knew that waiting was the only available action, and so she was going to do it completely. The nurse came out at 7:42 and told her everything was fine. She closed her eyes, opened them, said thank you. She was allowed in at 8:15. Elena was in the bed with the baby on her chest, and she looked wrecked and illuminated, the specific dual quality of a woman who has just done the hardest physical thing and come out the other side of it into something that rearranged her entirely. She looked up when Lucia came in. She didn't say anything. Lucia sat in the chair beside the bed and looked at the baby. At the dark hair and the furious expression, which had softened in the last half hour into something more open. The face of someone who had decided, provisionally, that the outside world might be worth investigating. Does she have a name? Lucia said. Clara, Elena said. I decided last week. I wasn't going to tell anyone until she was here. She looked down at her. Clara Moretti. Moretti. Her name, not Valenti. It's a good name, Lucia said. Elena looked up. Thank you, she said. The 2 words carried the weight of everything. The weeks, the house, the garden, the phone calls, the windowless room, the document, the morning with the binder, all of it compressed into those 2 words because there weren't enough other words, and these 2 would have to do. You don't need to thank me, Lucia said. I know I don't need to. Elena looked at her. I want to. Lucia leaned forward and put one finger against Clara's small fist. The baby's fingers opened and closed around it automatically. The ancient reflex, the grip that predates everything else, the thing bodies know before they know anything. She sat like that for a while. The room was quiet. Outside the window, the morning was coming in clear and cool, the kind of May morning that made you understand why people wrote about May mornings. The light doing something specific to the air, the quality of it that said, starting. Adrian came to the hospital, not unannounced. He called first, asked Elena if it was all right, waited for an answer before he came. She said yes after a moment that told him she had needed the moment, but the answer was genuine. He came in the afternoon when the room was quieter and Elena had slept 2 hours, and Clara was in the clear bassinet beside the bed. He stood in the doorway for a second, the way he'd stood in the doorway of the kitchen in Westchester. A big man making himself smaller, not from weakness, but from understanding, finally, that some rooms required a different size. He looked at the baby. He sat in the chair Lucia had vacated, and he looked at his daughter. His daughter, Moretti, not Valenti. And he had no claim on the name, and he knew it, and the knowing sat in his chest like a stone, not moving, just there. She looks like you, Elena said. She looks like herself, he said. Elena almost smiled. That too. He stayed an hour. They talked about practical things. The apartment Lucia had helped Elena find, 3 blocks from the estate. The kind of small and manageable that Elena said she wanted. Nothing that needed a staff or a PR presence or a security detail. Just walls and light and room for Clara to grow into. They talked about what the legal arrangement would look like. Adrian had had his attorneys draw something up that was, his attorney had told him, more generous than legally required. He had told his attorney that was the point. When he was getting ready to leave, he stood by the bassinet one more time, looked at Clara for a long moment. I'm going to try, he said. Not to Elena, almost to the baby, though the baby was asleep and wouldn't understand for years. I know that's not something you can evaluate now. I know it's the minimum thing, but I'm going to try to be worth knowing. Elena watched him. I believe you, she said. He looked at her. I believe you're going to try, she said. That's not the same as saying it'll be enough, but I believe you mean it right now. She paused. That's more than I could have said 3 months ago. He nodded once. He picked up his jacket. At the door he stopped. Tell my mother thank you. She won't let me say it to her. She just changes the subject. A pause. Tell her I know what she did, all of it, and that I understand now why. He walked out. Elena looked at Clara sleeping in the bassinet. She looked at the door Adrian had just walked through. She looked at the window and the May morning beyond it, the light doing what it did on mornings that felt like starting. She thought about Rosa, the woman Lucia had told her about. Rosa, who was somewhere in this world in her 40s, living whatever life she'd built from the wreckage of someone else's decision. She didn't know Rosa's last name. She didn't know where she was. But she thought about her, and she thought, I hope it got easier. I hope she found something that was hers. Clara made a small sound. Not crying, just a sound. The sound of someone checking that the world was still there. Elena put her hand in the bassinet, and the baby's hand found it, the same reflex Lucia had felt that morning. She held on. 3 months later, Lucia planted a new bed of roses in the garden. Not the variety she'd been tending, a different one, lighter, a yellow cream that she'd been looking at in the catalog for 2 years, and kept telling herself she'd get around to. She got around to it on a Tuesday in August, her knees in the dirt, her hands in the soil, the particular meditative quality of work that required attention without strategy. Danny brought her water at noon. Didn't say anything. Set it on the low wall and went back inside. She worked until 2. When she was done, she sat on the flagstone and looked at what she'd planted and thought about how long it would take them to come in. 2 years, maybe, before they were really established. 2 years before the bed looked like what she was seeing in her head right now. She thought, I'll be here to see it. She thought, Elena will bring Clara to see it. She thought about Sal, somewhere in the city, living the quieter life that the end of ambition produced. She thought about Simone Arquette, 7 months along now, who had moved to a smaller apartment uptown, and who had, by all accounts, more backbone than anyone in this story had given her credit for. She thought about Adrian in his office on Chambers Street, running the organization differently than before. Not perfectly. Nothing in that world ran perfectly, but with a quality of awareness that hadn't been there before. The awareness of a man who had been forced to see clearly and had decided to keep his eyes open. She thought about Marcus, who had done the right thing and lost his position temporarily and been quietly reinstated. Not because Adrian owed him, but because Adrian, finally, understood what owing was. She sat in the garden until the light started to change. Then she stood, brushed the dirt from her knees, and went inside to wash her hands before Lucia drove over to Elena's apartment for dinner. Tuesday dinner, which had become the standing arrangement, the weekly hour in Elena's kitchen with Clara and the bouncer on the floor, and food that was usually something simple, because Elena was learning to cook and Lucia was learning to let her. She ran the water cold over her hands and felt it and looked out the window at the new roses, still small, still getting their roots down, and thought, everything that matters takes longer than you think and costs more than you plan, and the only question is whether you can stand to be in it for the full length of it. She turned off the water, dried her hands, picked up her keys, drove.